Today, the Supreme Court will hear challenges to two of the Biden administration's vaccine policies. The requirements impact nearly 100 million private workers and healthcare workers. One measure requires large private companies to implement a vaccination requirement, but if the workers don't want to get the shot, they have to wear a mask and be tested weekly. The other requires workers at federal healthcare facilities to get the COVID-19 shot. So we want to bring in Melissa Quinn, who's following this story for us from Washington. Thanks for joining us, Melissa. A lot of people heard about this. You know, it's one thing for the federal government to mandate federal employees to be vaccinated, but we're talking about private businesses with more than 100 employees. Who is challenging the vaccination policies, and what is their argument?
Well, good morning. So on the OSHA rule, this rule for these larger companies, these legal challenges have been brought by more than 24 primarily Republican-led states, a whole slew of business associations, as well as a number of businesses who would be covered by this OSHA rule. Their primary argument is that the Biden administration exceeded its authority when it issued this rule, and that OSHA in particular needed clear authorization from Congress in order to do so. And then on the second rule that the Supreme Court will consider today, which is for healthcare workers at facilities who receive Medicare and Medicaid funding, again, you had a whole slew of Republican-led states mounting these legal challenges. And similar to in the OSHA case, these states are arguing that the Secretary of Health and Human Services needed clear authorization from Congress in order to issue this vaccine requirement for these healthcare workers. In that case in particular, the states are arguing that if the rule is allowed to take effect, it could lead millions of healthcare workers across the country to face termination for not complying with the rule, and that would really exacerbate staffing shortages and have a particularly hard impact in rural areas of the country.
All right, Melissa, so you've clarified what the state's position is. What is the government's argument for forcing private companies and healthcare facilities to require vaccinations for their workers?
Yeah, so in its filings with the Supreme Court, the Justice Department has, of course, noted the severity of the COVID-19 pandemic. You have over 800,000 American lives lost, and they have said that it has the authority to go ahead and issue both the OSHA vaccine and test requirement, as well as the rule for these healthcare workers. On the OSHA rule, the Justice Department is arguing that OSHA has the power when workers face grave dangers from new hazards or agents to issue requirements that would protect worker lives, and they believe that this OSHA requirement, this OSHA rule is going to go ahead and do just that. On the rule from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the government is arguing that the Secretary of Health and Human Services has the power to issue requirements to protect and care for patient lives. And this rule regarding these healthcare workers is, again, going to do just that.
So I guess the justices kind of are going to have to decide whether or not they're going to focus on this very narrowly and just look at these requirements coming down from the Biden administration, or broadly and look at, well, you know, what comes under the jurisdiction of states' rights or private businesses versus what the federal government can do. What will the justices be considering?
Yeah, so it's important to note that these cases came to the Supreme Court through emergency requests. So the justices are going to be looking at whether or not these rules from the Biden administration can go ahead and be implemented, or whether they should be blocked from taking effect. So the justices in these cases are not going to be issuing a ruling on the legality or the merits of the cases, but whether at these earlier stages while this litigation continues. Of course, the justices themselves have not been immune to the effects of the pandemic. The building is still closed to the public. The justices, through all of its last term, heard oral arguments remotely, and only Justice Sotomayor has also been wearing a mask. So they themselves know very acutely how the pandemic has affected their workplace as well.
Yeah, and let's look at some specifics. In recent months, as you know, Melissa, the court declined to block vaccination policies for students at Indiana University, teachers in New York, healthcare workers in Maine, in Massachusetts. What drove that decision?
Yeah, it's interesting. As you mentioned, in those cases, the justices have allowed these state vaccine requirements to go into effect. Similar to what we have here, though, those cases came to the Supreme Court on these emergency requests. So we actually don't have full reasoning from the court as to why they ruled the way that they did. I do want to note, though, that the court has been far more skeptical across the pandemic in cases involving executive branch authority. For example, if you remember last year, the Supreme Court said that the CDC could no longer enforce its eviction moratorium. And we did have Justice Brett Kavanaugh writing separately at one of the stages in that case. And he said that he did believe that the CDC likely exceeded its authority there.
There's a third vaccination requirement for federal contractors. It's been put on hold nationwide after it was blocked by an order of a federal judge in Georgia. So what's happening with that case?
Well, in that case, if the Biden administration has not already, I expect that they will appeal the decision of the district court judge to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which hears cases for Georgia and the neighboring states. And then depending on how likely a three-judge panel from the 11th Circuit rules, we could see this come back up before the Supreme Court on an emergency request once again.
All right. Melissa, excellent reporting as always. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
And you can follow the latest developments on these arguments before the Supreme Court by visiting our website, cbsnews.com. There you can find Melissa's article, which you see there on your screen, highlighting exactly what the Biden administration is facing as it heads to the Supreme Court.